Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today, I'm going to do a fairly brief weekend preview episode. I'll try and keep it around the 30-minute mark. We'll see. There's also an article I want to talk about that was in Bloomberg today about Regal Cinemas planning to implement dynamic pricing at the movie theaters, which I think there's a lot to unpack and talk about there. So maybe we'll get to that. But first, we're going to talk about what will be opening this weekend at the box office. So last weekend was fairly crowded. We had 5 openers last weekend. Not all super wide, but 5 wide releases in total. So it was pretty packed. This weekend's a little bit lighter. We have Jigsaw coming out from Lionsgate. That is the Saw sequel. I believe it's like the 8th Saw movie. I'll have to look on Box Office Mojo and see where it is in the Saw series. Yeah, it is the 8th. God, I'll walk through the Saw series pretty quickly in a bit when we do a deep dive on Jigsaw. But I kind of thought we'd never see, well, I don't know. Horror franchises tend to have really long shelf lives. Look at Freddy, look at Jason, look at the Halloween series. They always seem to find a way to come back, right? They always find a way to, reboot after 5 or 6 years and say, hey, let's do it again, like Halloween H2O. Then there's like that weird horror revival, like Freddy versus Jason. And you're just like, as a horror fan, I love it. But it's so cheesy and it's so clearly a money grab. The more cynical side of me just says, like, why are they doing another Jigsaw? Like, obviously they want to make some cash, but like, really an 8th movie? It hasn't been that long. The original Saw came out only 13 years ago. Started in October of 2004. That's how James Wan got his start. The amazing director of The Conjuring. And I guess he did Insidious as well. He's like the horror master these days. But he got his, at least horror start in Saw. And that was 13 years ago. And you're talking 8 movies in 13 years. That's like way too many. Even if it's like a successful franchise, which it has and hasn't been. It's kind of, it's definitely tapered off here in the last couple of films in the series, but they're going back to the well. They're going back again, seeing how they're going to do. So we'll talk about that one a little bit more. It's opening on 2,800 screens. That's Jigsaw. Also opening this weekend is Suburbicon. This is the George Clooney directed film that was written by Clooney and the Coen brothers, starring Matt Damon, Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, and Julianne Moore. They're typical, that's like the Coen brothers crew of people. I guess Matt Damon's a little bit different. He's kind of newer to that group. I look at that though, and it's like, man, George Clooney, Josh Brolin, they were just in, I think, Hail Caesar. Was Oscar Isaac in that? I don't know. He might have been. Probably not. But Oscar Isaac was in the wonderful Inside Llewyn Davis, which came out a few years ago. That, if you haven't seen that movie, that's definitely, I think, as someone who loves the Coen brothers, one of those films that was not a hit at the box office, but I think within time will be looked back on as probably one of, if not their best film. But that's just a little critic aside for you. So Suburbicon is George Clooney directed, opening tomorrow night, starting in previews, opening on 2,000 theaters, 2,050 to be exact, from Paramount. Now, we'll talk about it a little bit more in depth, but it's probably not going to do all that great. It's not going to be a huge movie. Of the 3 that we're talking about today, Jigsaw's definitely going to take the cake for being number 1 of the new wide releases this weekend. The last but not least is Thank You for Your Service. This is a military, sort of coming home military drama, directed by Jason Dean Hall. I believe it is his debut directorial effort. I think Steven Soderbergh, I think he's is sort of his mentor or something, like helped him set him up on this film. That's what I was reading on Deadline. Fairly straightforward Iraq war, Afghan war veteran story. Miles Teller's in the lead. Haley Bennett, Amy Schumer's in this. Is that true? Amy Schumer is in this movie. It says this on Box Office Mojo. We'll talk about this one a little bit later, but like, I don't really know how to even guess what that one's gonna do. Let's start with Jigsaw though, because that one's a little bit easier. It's the biggest wide release of the weekend. It's playing on 2,800 theaters. Deadline was suggesting that it's going to win the weekend. They're saying low 20s for Jigsaw. Now, if we take a look back, before we dive into what the industry is saying, let's just take a brief review of what's happened with the Saw series since 2004 when it started. So the original Saw opened up only at 18 million. And these, I'm not going to adjust the numbers. These are the actuals, so we can sort of adjust them as we go along, or in your head, if you will. On Lionsgate, these are all Lionsgate movies. Opened at 18, ended up at 55, which is a pretty good hit for them. That's kind of crazy when you realize that it opened on the 29th, so it only had 2 days until Halloween. Which means you would think they would make all of their money up front, but they made $55 million total domestically on only an $18 million opening, which is an outrageous multiplier. It's 3x, but like, it's kind of weird. Like, why wouldn't you open it like mid-October to get 2 weeks at least? I don't know, crazy. But they seem to sort of have selected that weekend, this weekend, the Halloween weekend, as their sort of place to plant their flag. So Saw 1 was in 2004, and then one after the other until 2008. 2005, we had Saw 2, opened at 31. Fantastic opening. Ended at 87. 2006, we had Saw 3, opened at 33. That's the highest of the entire series, opened at 33. Closed at 80. Saw 4 in 2007, opened at 31, closed at 63. So now we're starting sort of the roller coaster peaked and Saw 2 in terms of total gross, peaked in terms of opening weekend with Saw 3, and now it's sort of diminishing returns for at least a decade now. So Saw 4 closed at 63 in 2007. 2008, we had Saw 5, opened at 30. Closed out at about 57. So right there, we're already sort of coming back down to earth to what the original was. Saw 6, I can't believe they made this many Saw movies. Just looking at this list, it's just mind-numbing. Even with Nightmare on Elm Street and Jason and Halloween, those series, it didn't really seem like they milked it this much, like every year from 2004 all the way to 2010. Basically 7 straight movies in a row, at one every year. I don't know, it seems so gratuitous, no pun intended. But 2009 we had Saw 6, opened at 14. That's when you know things are over. The Saw before that had opened at 30. So opening weekend drops in half. Total take was horrendous. 27. Look at the multiplier on that. So this is Saw 6 back in 2009. Only does 27 total. Opens up 14. Sub 2x multiplier. Sub 2. Who is this? Zack Snyder with the sub 2x multiplier. Unbelievable. And so I think Lionsgate knew at this point that this series was essentially coming to an end, at least for now. And they finally put out, or sort of finally, the last one they put out in the series was Saw 3D in 2010. I don't remember this one at all, to be honest with you. Cary Elwes is in it. He's been in a lot of them. He was in the original. Which is so strange to see him in that movie, because knowing him before Saw it's just so weird. Because like, if you talk to a younger person now and you show them a picture of Cary Elwes, they'd be like, oh yeah, Saw, the guy from Saw. well, it's like they completely ignore he had this huge career before that. It was more of a, I guess, Princess Bride people probably know him from as well. I guess I know him from Glory more than anything. I always saw him as kind of like a stage actor. I don't know, maybe that's like a weird perspective to have, but yeah, I always thought he had like a lot of integrity. And then he's like in these Lionsgate like B horror movies, and it's just like, dude, what are you doing, man? But he probably made a ton of money off of it at the end of the day, so I can't really fault him too much. So Saw 3D, the final movie in the series, the original run of the series, October 2010, opened at 22, ended up at 45. So a little bit of an uptick from Saw 6, which was in 2009, but just sort of, it wasn't really there. That sub 2x multiplier, it's basically a signal to Lionsgate, just stop doing this. People don't want to see this stuff anymore. It's over. You had an amazing one of the best runs in horror history by far. I mean, I don't remember any other run like this. Everything's so back to back. And finally, I guess we get the reboot. And I don't even know that much about it. I've seen the trailer. Your expectations going in here, if you're looking at the history of the series, it's going to be probably, even if you adjust for inflation, which I can do, you're looking at, it's going to be, just like a super ballpark, it's going to be below 50. Like, we know that. It's probably going to be above 10 to the low teens. So you're looking at low teens to the 40s is the range of the last few films, or sorry, of the whole series. But if you look at the last few films, the last two opened at 25 and 16. And the one before that was 26. So you're basically, I think you're looking around that range, probably mid-teens to mid-20s. So we can keep narrowing down what we think this thing is going to do. Now, Deadline is saying low 20s for Jigsaw. That seems fair. That's sort of in the ballpark that we've already established based on the series of the films. Just to sort of keep everything on the level, 20 million, let's assume it does 22, right? Maybe on the higher end of what Deadline is thinking. It's on 2,800 theaters. So you're looking at a per theater average of about $7,850, which seems pretty healthy to me. That doesn't seem too anemic, like it's too low. Doesn't seem outrageous either. It feels like it's in the right ballpark. But it's always good to get a second perspective on these opening numbers, because they can be all over the place, to be honest with you. And Deadline, I feel like in general, Deadline tends to take a little bit more of an industry or conservative line in the predictions, just because they're so close with the industry and they have all these amazing industry sources. You can't keep those sources if you say Jigsaw is going to do $12 million over the weekend. Like, you have to keep up appearances with your sort of sources and business partners. Essentially, they're business partners. So they're going to basically take whatever the industry says and whatever their inside sources say, they're going to go with that. Box Office Pro tends to be a little bit better with the long-term stuff. Short-term stuff is a little spotty. They're saying 12.5. See, now this is why I love this stuff, because, Deadline's saying low 20s. Right, low 20s. That could be 22. That could be 23. Box Office Pro is saying 12.5. Like, the discrepancy here is so outrageous. And these are, not that it's like it's $10 million, but that's $10 million of like $20 million. That's like a 50% swing one way or the other. It's nuts. Box Office Mojo does not have their predictions up yet. I mean, it is Wednesday, so it might be a little early for some of these groups. I'm going to check out Variety real quick and see if they have a box office preview up. Going into the weekend, if I did not look at the Saw previous numbers and I didn't look at what these predictions were, I would have said probably mid-teens, 14, 15 is what I would have said, just based on gut and from what I've seen. Variety does have their predictions up. They're saying 18 to 22 million for Jigsaw. So Oh, where do we go with this? Where do we go with this? So a couple things to consider, right? So we talked about the series of Saw and how it's done. That gave us a ballpark figure. We are in Halloween weekend. Halloween is next Tuesday, so it's kind of falling in the middle of the week. So I think it might hurt the sort of Halloween box office, because when it falls on a Saturday or Friday, it tends to puff things up a lot. In terms of what's happened so far in terms of horror this month, I mean, you had Medea do okay last weekend, not great. I thought it was actually going to do worse than it did, but it did definitely underperform. And so, I think that that might help this weekend a bit with Jigsaw, because a lot of people who wanted to see their Halloween movie maybe did not go to Medea, the second Medea, Boo 2. You had Happy Death Day, which is at 42 right now, 42 million, which did very well, overperformed, I think, significantly. Opened to 26 a couple of weeks ago. And so I kind of feel like, if I'm looking over October and the horror situation right now, I feel like Happy Death Day is going to be the winner of October horror. Obviously for this season, it's going to be It. It is the biggest horror movie ever, by far, and I think it's going to do really well this weekend. They're bumping it back up to 2,500 theaters, I hear. It's kind of the last hurrah for that film. It's been out for it will be out for about 2 months at the end of next week, so it's approaching that 2-month mark. It's Halloween. It's like the cultural zeitgeist horror movie. They're gonna make their cash and sort of call it a day by pumping it up on a few more theaters. That's gonna hurt Jigsaw significantly. I think the fact that Happy Death Day did so well and will do well this weekend also is gonna hurt it. Boo 2, I think, is going to be kind of a push on it. So let's say, what do I guess? So I've seen what the industry says. I feel like Deadline and Variety are too high. They're on the same page. They're saying 18 to 22. Deadline saying low 20s. I think 20s is kind of out of the picture for this film. I just don't feel like anybody gives a flying shit about Saw anymore, and maybe that's my sort of bias. I never gave a shit about that series, but I feel like younger people who kind of grew up with that series, there might be some nostalgia there for it, but I don't think so, to be honest with you. I just don't see it. The trailers were okay, but it just seems like another throwaway horror film. So I'm going to go lower. I'm going to say, I think 12.5, the Box Office Pro is saying, that seems too low to me. That just doesn't seem, it's Halloween weekend. It's a horror movie from a known franchise. It doesn't seem it's going to crash and burn that much. But let's get an idea of what that would be with the PTA, the per theater average, if it did 12.5. You're looking at about $4,500 per theater. That seems a little bit more in line with what I'm thinking. I'm thinking probably, I don't know, let's say $5,500 per theater on 2,800 theaters. And that would get us 2,800 theaters, about 15.4 million. That feels really good to me. I like that number, 15.4 million. So I think that's going to be my guess for it. It's not going to do that great. I don't know why they were bringing it back. Maybe Lionsgate just wanted to make a quick buck. I don't think it's even going to make that much money. I just don't even think it's worth their trouble. Like, sure, it's not going to lose money. I guarantee you that. It's going to play decently well this weekend and through Halloween. It'll end up at like 35-40 million bucks total. They probably made it for like $2 million bucks, maybe 3. If they made it more for that, then they are stupid. If they made like Medea, Medea cost $25 million. If you want to see a really good takedown of Boo 2, check out Double Toasted's review of it. I watched it this morning at like 7 a.m. because I just woke up. and I wanted to watch something, and I put that on, and it was just like nonstop blast for 30 minutes. They destroy that film. One of the things they talk about is like, how would you spend $25 million on this film to make this? It's like they have this whole theory that Tyler Perry is using it as like a tax dodge or something like that. He's pocketing all this cash. In any event, I think 15.4 sounds about right for Jigsaw. It's kind of a really cynical movie. It looks, extraordinarily nondescript and mediocre. But there's something to be said for, it's set in real estate. It's location. In the box office, it's all about timing, right? Like when you're releasing a film, and they have the perfect release date for it. You can't ask for a better one. I think they could have made more money if they put it out maybe last week. But in terms of hype on an opening weekend, you really can't beat a Halloween weekend. So I'm going to say 15.4 for Jigsaw. And that's kind of I would say a middling performance for that film. I think the studio definitely wants it to hit 20, but I just don't see that happening. Okay, so that's the biggest release this weekend. The second big release is Suburbicon. Talked a little bit about that. George Clooney directed. Has he directed a movie before? Did he do Good Night, Good Luck? I gotta check this out. Dude, he's like directed like 4 movies. How did I not know this? He directed Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, which I don't remember. Came out in New Year's Eve Day in 2002. Charlie Kaufman wrote that. How do I not remember this film? So strange. Good Night, Good Luck is probably his most famous film. Had a lot of Oscar buzz. Leatherheads in 2008. I don't remember that one at all. Ides of March he did. I forgot about that one. And he also did Monuments Men. So this is actually his 6th film. I don't know why I thought it was his first. Probably because the rest of his movies just didn't really pop off that much. But Suburbicon is about a suburban dad and father and husband who I don't think this is giving anything away because it happens in the trailer. I think he borrows money from the wrong people. His wife ends up getting murdered by these loan sharks, and then it sort of spirals out of control from there. All sort of set to the 1960s suburbia background going on there. I don't know. This one is a tough sell, and there's a couple big issues that I see right away. One is that it is not a mass market film. There's nothing mass market about it. I have no idea why they thought it was a mass market film. It doesn't really fit that mold in any way. It definitely feels and looks like a Coen Brothers film. And if you think about it, like Coen Brothers films are great and we all love them. People who are film nerds, they're basically probably the most celebrated director duo out there, maybe even in the history of American film. Like they're that good and that well respected. I already gushed about Inside Llewyn Davis earlier on the show. What they're not known for is putting out huge movies, right? Their biggest movie is True Grit with Jeff Bridges back in 2010. That was a great movie. Really a sort of a remake, but a really great Western. It opened at 24, ended up at 171. But more recently, and I think there was a play to make Hail Caesar, their last movie. It came out in February 2016. That was only a year and a half ago, essentially. Opened at 11, only ended up doing about 30.5. It was not a good performance for that film. And even as a fan of their films, it felt like Hail Caesar was an art film, but they tried to play it off like it wasn't. Like a normal person from Nebraska would go and see that movie. And that's just like, look, the Coen Brothers, they're not for everybody. They're not for most people. They're for like nerdy people who really, really like well done films that have a pretty arty edge to them, right? Like their wheelhouse is the art movie scene. That's where they play the best. So when this movie Suburbicon, which is opening tomorrow, when the trailer had the look of a Coen Brothers movie, I was like, whoa, pump the brakes. This looks. If you didn't tell me who the director was and I saw the trailer, I'd be like, oh, it's the Coen. It's so obviously the Coen Brothers. It has their look and feel to it, right? So they're playing essentially this art house film and trying to push it out to the wide audiences. It's just not going to work. That's one issue. The other issue is that kind of related to that issue is the style of the film, and the hook to it just isn't there. It's listed as a crime comedy. It can't, it definitely has a comedic feel to it. Also super, super dark, the trailer. That's not going to play well with the wide audiences because they want set genres. They want to know, is this really a comedy or this is like a crime movie? Because they both have very different emotional narratives to them. And this one's trying to cross the two and it's blending genres. I just don't feel like that works a lot with the mass audience stuff. In any event, I just don't think it's going to do very well. I think the entire concept of releasing this wide was just a bad idea. And the marketing missteps, I think, are related to the initial sort of mistake of thinking, oh, we can sell this movie to everywhere. I just don't see that happening. In terms of what people are saying, Deadline's saying $8 million. It's only on 2,000 theaters, so it's not going to do, even if it does pop off, it can't really pop off that much. Oh, another thing that Deadline brings up, which I think is fascinating, is with Coen Brothers movies and with George Clooney in general involved in the cast, my assumption is that it's going to be an art house movie. So the quality is going to be that high. Well, I would assume in the 80s or 90s in terms of its Rotten Tomato score from critics. Like I don't even see anywhere around that. Suburbicon is now sitting at 37. And that is from 63 reviewers. That's terrible. Like that's like really, really bad. And there's no real good way to cut that. Like if this was like a mass, if this was a mass market studio film and it got like a 37, it still would be disastrous. But the fact that all these amazing actors are involved and it's probably an amazing script from the Coen Brothers and it gets a 37, that's not good. So this film's essentially, I think, going to be DOA. There's going to be no Oscar buzz for it because the quality sucks. It's not going to pop off with wide audiences in any way. So Deadline's saying 8 million. Box Office Pro is telling me 5 million. That's a huge discrepancy. And Variety is saying 5 to 7 million. So let's just say 7 for right now and see where that gets us. It's actually not, it's on 2,046 screens. If you're keeping track at home, folks, I don't want to feel like I'm lying to you. That puts it at about $3,420 per theater. God, that feels low. Like, when you're approaching the $3,000 mark per theater on a wide release opening weekend, that's pretty pitiful. But with this film, it's awkward. It's a completely awkward conception. Now, honestly, if this was just like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles release, I'd be like, oh, this could do okay if the quality was there. It's not there. But if the quality was there, I would be like, I could do okay. Maybe coming in about a 50K, 60K per theater average, maybe even a lot higher, maybe 80, 90K per theater. Really, really crush those, the big cities, and then slowly expand out. I could see it doing all right, but like this, I don't see it going anywhere, to be honest with you. So, I don't know. I just feel bad. I don't know. I'm biased. I feel bad giving it like that low of a number. I'm going to say it's going to do 4,000 just because, maybe Matt Damon puts people in the seats. I don't know. That's my theory. That's my crazy working theory right now. That puts it at 8.1. That feels too high, but I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say 8.1 and agree with Deadline on this. I think it's going to do just over $8 million. That per theater average of the 5s and 7s is just way too low to me. With Matt Damon, George Clooney involved, despite the fact that it looks super awkward and weird, there is a certain allure to it, right? That people be like, well, this is something different. It's also counting programming to like it and the horror movies over the weekend, so maybe that'll happen. I know when I have my follow-up show on Sunday, it's going to be below 8, but I'm sticking with my gut. I'm going with 8.1 million for Suburbicon opening tomorrow. Last but not least for this weekend is DreamWorks with their PTSD drama. What a strange thing. This is not my words. This is Variety. PTS drama. Thank you for your service. This one is looking at a similar range to Suburbicon, 5 to 7. Deadline is saying low single digits on this one. How does that make any sense? Low single digits. It's opening on just as many screens as Suburbicon. I don't know. That's a very strange guess from Deadline. Box Office Pro saying 3.9. Ugh, that's terrible. So it's opening on 2,054 screens to be exact. Man, I don't even know how to begin with this one. Like, those numbers just seem so small to me. There's a lot of service people in this country these days. It's like, we got how many wars we're fighting right now. So there's people coming home with a lot of emotional and mental illness that a lot of them don't deal with, and it ends up becoming real problems. And I think that's what the movie's about. I don't know. It feels like maybe that's just like a really super niche audience, but I think it's an interesting story that they tell. But I don't know. Maybe I feel like war movies where the war isn't really over yet are could be a tough sell. I'm trying to think like when were the huge Vietnam War movies that came out, and I feel like none of them were out anywhere near the end of the war, like not in the same year, or not even close to the same year. And we started to, I think, well, let me double check on that. And Platoon came out in the 80s, like 86, so that was like over a decade after the war had ended. I guess Apocalypse Now would be another one. I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, without emotional distance, I think it's hard for people to want to see a movie about a war like this. Apocalypse Now is 79. Saigon fell in what, 75? Maybe even earlier. What did it fall? Yeah, you're right, 75. So Saigon falls in 75, and sort of the big movies don't come out for at least a few years after that. And by the time Saigon had fallen, we had already had been out of the country for years. I think 73 is when we really started to leave. Sorry for like the Vietnam War history. I was just trying to put the dates together. But the whole point of this is, if you're still sending people to that same war, and we're still at war in Iraq. We're still at war in Afghanistan. And, we're going to be at war in Africa apparently soon. It's hard to get people outside of the military to go see those films, right? Like, it's just, I don't know. It's just not going to happen. So I don't really think there's any sort of general audience for this film, which is now I'm understanding why Deadline and Box Office Pro are saying like, $3 million. It's just like, maybe there's just nothing for this. I'm going to say, let's say like it does 3.9 million, just shy of 4 on its 2,050 theaters. Let's see if I can get a good number for that. Per theater would be about, wow, 1,900 per theater. That feels too low. Now that I'm looking at the per theater averages, which is why I always look at them, because they give you a really good barometer on how well this movie's actually going to do. Because the problem is, when you throw out an estimate for the weekend and say, 10 million, 20 million, it doesn't really mean that much unless you know the theater counts and figure out that ratio. because then it's a little bit more applicable to other movies. That feels too low. I'm going to say it's going to at least do $2,500 per theater. I'm going to say it's going to do $3,200 per theater, and come in at $6.5 million. I think that's going to be my range for that one. I don't really see it being that much lower than Suburbicon, to be honest with you. I think it might even beat Suburbicon if it has a little bit of a breakout. I think there's more of an audience for Thank You for Your Service than there's Suburbicon. Okay, so those are the new releases. I think in Jigsaw, I think it's going to do about, what did I say, 15 something? About 15 million, mid-teens, I would say, mid to higher teens. I don't think the key with that one is I don't think it's going to break 20. I think that those days are over for the Saw series. Suburbicon, I think, is going to flop, and at about 8 million. And I think Thank You for Your Service, it's also technically going to flop, but more like the $6 million range. So those are the openers for this weekend. I'll do my Sunday show to sort of recap what happened over the weekend. The other thing I wanted to talk about on this little preview show, I mentioned that it is expanding, so that was one thing I wanted to talk about. They're going to expand it for Halloween weekend. But the big sort of story that I found on Bloomberg, and actually found this via, if you're really into the box office stuff, there's a few places that you can go to sort of connect with other people, which I love doing. Obviously Twitter, follow certain people on Twitter, boxofficereport.com. Great website, awesome Twitter to follow if you're really into this stuff. But if you really want to connect with people on like a forum, there is Reddit has a really great box office forum, and that's this subreddit, which is actually where I found this article. Really, really good stuff there. The discussions can be a little contentious on there, and a lot of people aren't very, I guess, well educated or that knowledgeable about the box office, but it's a good place to sort of engage with other people. If you're a super, super nerd and like you love this stuff and you think about it a lot and are passionate about it, which is gotta be a small subset of people, and I'm obviously one of them, but I think the best place for really good discussions about box office that are super in depth and incredibly nerdy and kind of vicious sometimes, check out Box Office Theory, their forums, their box office forums. It's my favorite place to go and read about stuff, just because they get the numbers before anybody else, they analyze them before anybody else, and you can ask them a question and they'll get back to you immediately with like really, really good answers. Anything at all you're interested about the box office, definitely check out Box Office Theory forums. Okay, so I found this article on the Reddit box office subreddit. The headline is Regal Cinema's plans. I love that I cannot read a headline out loud. Regal Cinema's plan may let you pay less for flops, more for hits. Essentially what they're saying is Regal is testing a demand-based pricing for films, potentially leading to higher prices for top hits and low prices for flops. A big change for an industry that typically uses one size fits all. And this is from Bloomberg, so it's not just like some puffy blog thing. This is like a real news service. Working with app maker Atom Tickets LLC, which has lobbied theaters to try dynamic pricing, Regal plans to test the concept in early 2018 to see if it boosts revenues and fills more seats at non-peak times. Quote, changes to the historical pricing structure have been discussed but rarely tested in our industry, and we are excited to learn more about how pricing changes impact customer behavior. This is Amy Miles, who's the CEO of this app company, Atom Tickets. Then it basically goes on to talk about how movie theaters are losing money. Total revenues at Regal year so far are down 12%, which is huge, which is a lot of money, like that's nothing to scoff at. And if you're like a follower of kind of another nerdy pursuit that I have is like studying businesses, not like case studies, but like especially why businesses decline, and what happens and why do they decline. I find it super fascinating. If you like that stuff, check out the YouTube channel I think it's called The Company Man. It basically, he walks through why a few companies have failed over the years. And one thing that you'll notice, and that I've noticed in those sort of kind of video essays about these companies failing, is that the moment their revenue starts to drop, that's like the canary in the coal mine. And that sounds obvious, right? But normally what you see on Wall Street analysis is, oh, what are their profits? What are their profits at? It's all about profit, and growth, right? But when you see these case studies that this guy does, and they're pretty fascinating studies of companies that are now gone. But one thing that always sort of sticks out to me in those studies is like there's always this moment where the business just starts to lose revenue. It's not even like, it can be related to a lot of things like over expansion or a changing business model or changing business environment. But all of a sudden the revenue starts to dip and they can't pull out of the tailspin, right? And it keeps going down. I do kind of wonder to some degree if movie theaters are not getting close to a situation like that, because when you're off 12% of your revenue from last year, that's a significant amount. Like if you were off 12% of just your net gross or your profits or whatever, that's a totally different story, right? That's more explainable. Maybe you're shifting, maybe you're investing more in the business in the next couple of years, but 12% of your actual revenue, that's like a sign of a sickness or a disease that's happening. And that's what's going on with Regal right now. And so they're thinking about implementing dynamic pricing. And at this article, I love the last paragraph because one of the, I don't even know if it's the CEO, but someone at Regal basically says they won't even consider doing sharing a revenue share with MoviePass, which sort of made a ton of headlines a couple of months ago or a few months ago now, where they said, hey, everybody, if you don't know what MoviePass is, it's a subscription-based service that basically says, hey, you can go and see as many movies as you want if you buy the subscription, which sounds outrageous and it sounds too good to be true, but it actually works. They basically send you a MasterCard debit card, and you go to the movie theater, you turn on the location services, you check in at the movie theater, and say, hey, I'm going to buy this ticket at this show. You check in, use the credit card that they give you. It's activated for a half hour afterwards, and go see the movie. You can see a new movie every day if you wanted to, and it's only $10 a month. Totally outrageous. That's like less than the price of a normal ticket to the movies. It kind of makes zero sense from an economic perspective. But MoviePass before this has been around for a few years, and I've had it for a couple of years. They used to charge like $30 a month or like $40 a month, and then it was like $50, I think, for a while. And if you see a lot of movies, then it still sort of made sense. But like even when you're talking like, let's say it was $35, like here in Tennessee, that's, just over 3 movies at least. And I love going to the movies, but like, I don't know, it's weird. When it dropped to $10 a month, I started to go all the time. When it was more money, I went less, which is so weird. In any event, so Regal is really trying to push off MoviePass and say, screw you guys. We're going to try a different path with a different company that they're more in bed with to see if they can't stop this bleeding revenue. And I can't emphasis enough how bad those revenue numbers are. Like it says to me that there is a massive problem with the industry, or at least that company specifically. But AMC is also way down, or whoever their competitor. I don't know. I guess Regal and AMC the same anymore. I don't even remember. But it's bad news bears. Like something has gone dramatically wrong, and maybe they make it up with Last Jedi and Thor and Justice League over the holiday season. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't think those movies are going to be so abnormally do so much abnormally good business that's going to make up for that 12% loss in revenue. So they're looking at different solutions, and this solution is dynamic pricing. This is something that I have thought about for a lot over the years as a possible solution to help people get people into the movies a lot more than they're going now. Average person in the United States only goes to about 4 movies a year in the theater. Most of the revenue that these theaters get is from frequent moviegoers, and those are people that go much more than that 4 times a year. Frequent moviegoers make up, I think, about 50% of total movie theater revenues. So if they're smart, they're going to play to that crowd, right? Because people go to movies a lot. The reason they probably don't go even more is because of the pricing, right? And I think pricing is like the elephant in the room for all of this. And I did a little bit of a weird sort of kind of casual economic study myself. And if you just look at what the average movie ticket price was back in like 1990, and then you look up what the average income for a person was back then, movie ticket prices have essentially, the real cost of them have doubled over the last 25 years. So what that means now is that a person pays double the percent of their income on a movie ticket than they did 25 years ago. That's a major, major problem, right? And I've talked about this a lot. I don't want to ramble on too much about this, but I do find this really fascinating. I think essentially what happened is that, in a very holistic viewpoint, going to the movies was a huge deal for people born in, people that were kids in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Like, that was what you did. Like, if you ask my uncles or my aunt, they're in their 70s, 80s, they'll talk about going to the movie theater like every day sometimes, when they were younger, like 5 or 6. They just their parents just go to the movie theater. There's your babysitter. Oh, they go in the summer because it was air conditioned. And so movie going used to be this kind of very common, very sort of very often leisure activity, right? People would just go constantly and see movies because it wasn't that expensive. It was entertainment. And that was it. It's that simple. It was like you get a lot of entertainment for a little bit of money, and it's something to do. People didn't have TVs back then. Radio was kind of the popular mass medium. So it was a good way to sort of see the moving picture show, as they used to say. Ever since that moment, movie theaters have been losing audiences, essentially. Ever since the peak, probably in the 40s. Ever since TV became a household item, and this would have been the early 50s in the United States, at least, it has been sort of fighting this battle with other forms of entertainment, right? And, that had a little bit of a reprieve in the early 2000s. Right after 9/11, movie going really popped off here in the States for a few years. Like 2002, 2003, 2004 were really banner years for movie theater attendance and revenues. And they ended up building a lot of movie theaters. There's also sort of the multiplex movement in the 90s that happened, where a lot of consolidation happened, and local theaters would then consolidate into more sort of almost like regional movie theaters. And so all of this is sort of background, and at the same time as there's this sort of falling number of people seeing movies each year, not only the number of people seeing movies, but the frequency is going down too, right? So they're kind of fighting this losing battle. And then that has always been going on. But then in 2010, I think, is the moment, the real turning point, is when Netflix started streaming movies online. And that was, cable TV was a big deal. DVD was a big deal, but the moment streaming became this real force was when I think the movie chain started to sweat a lot. And then sort of in tandem with streaming becoming so prominent and powerful, you also had this unbelievable rise in the quality of TV writing, directing, and just show creation. I mean, TV was always sort of this third or fourth tier art form, but since about 2005, it has completely changed its status. I think the best writing, this is like sort of just narrative art in general, is on TV. The best editing and production is for the most part on TV now. So now you have streaming, right, as a huge competitor to going to the theater. You know, keep in mind, it's always been falling. It's always this sort of losing battle. People have just been going less and less. And then you have TV all of a sudden have this renaissance of the art form at the same time. It's kind of the perfect storm, right? And, you know, I get the feeling that movie theaters in general are just, they are fighting a losing battle, but now it's becoming harder and harder to even fight. Right, like the battle, I think, is sort of coming to an end. The war is never going to end. Like, it's always going to be, there's always going to be movie theaters, right? It's just the current business model and how they have been formed and running won't work anymore. And so, Regal is basically grasping at straws with dynamic pricing. It makes a little bit of sense on the surface, right? But the moment you try to think about it in practice, it makes almost no sense. So what they're basically saying, true dynamic pricing would be demand pricing, right? So it would be like your Uber. And anybody who's used Uber before on a rainy Saturday night in New York City knows what I'm about to go here, is that no one wants to pay $50 for a cab ride, right? They'll pay $20. They may even pay $30. But on a rainy night and Saturday night in New York City to go 5 blocks, $50, not going to happen. That's what real true dynamic pricing is you price, you match supply and demand. And people say they love capitalism, but they don't. Because people do not want to spend $60 to see The Last Jedi. That's what will happen. Now, they may create a more limited sort of demand pricing. Some people are suggesting, even on the Reddit box office subreddit, that maybe they'll lock in prices for a couple of weeks and then it'll become dynamic. That's a possibility. I think another person said that it'll only really affect the more flop films. So like flop, that sounds like a really seedy film. I'm watching too much of the Deuce. For a movie like Geostorm was a good example. Like, let's say I want to see Geostorm. Okay. The idea would be that maybe it's locked in for a week or two. Opening weekend is a normal $10 price. Then it's gonna stay $10 for a couple of weeks. Then that price is gonna start to sort of drift down, right? And like in theory, I think that could work. It could work, but this is before Movie Pass, right? And if Movie Pass survives, it survives. If it doesn't, oh well. But Movie Pass sort of made me realize, as a moviegoer and as someone who thinks about the business and talks about the business and studies the business a lot, definitely from an amateur perspective. I'm not an insider. I don't work at Regal or anything like that. Movie Pass showed me that the major flaw of the movie industry and the movie theater industry, and specifically, is that they do not utilize their resources efficiently. And that sounds like super nerdy speak, right? But think about it this way, and I talked about this a lot when Movie Pass decided to drop its subscription to $10 a month, which is less than the price of a single movie ticket. Movie theaters are what at the end of the day? What is their capital resource that they provide people? Well, they have access to content, so that's one thing. But it's at the end of the day, there's competitors all around here. There's multiple people who have access to it. What they're selling is that seat in that location. And that's really it to see that film, right? So the movie industry has basically created these self limits. I'm only going to show this movie 4 times a day, and I'm going to sell tickets at $20 each. Therefore, I expect it to be like 1/3 full on a Tuesday afternoon or something like that. They have created this self-limited economy based on a resource that they have a total excess of, which is time and their location, right? Like, if you have a place where you can view a movie and you're not utilizing it to its maximum potential, you're running a bad business, right? Like, and they don't think it's a bad business because people will spend $15-$20 to see the new Spider-Man, right? But what they're failing to see is that's not what they're selling. They're not selling the exclusivity of that seat, of that movie, at that time. All they're really selling is the experience of seeing that movie, and that experience can be recreated in many different ways. And I think the dynamic pricing sort of thing that Regal is trying to do, while it is a valiant effort, is viewing movies how the industry wants to view them, as this exclusive entertainment event. It's an exclusive entertainment event. This is so nerdy, I apologize, but I love it. That's how they view a movie. That's not what a movie is. A movie is an experience that somebody has or can have, right? It's not exclusive. It's not necessarily even time dependent. Like, it doesn't have to be at 7 o'clock. You can view a movie at 8 o'clock. It's not going to change that much. The only real exclusivity that they have, movie theaters, is the fact that they have access to that content to show it on that day. That's it. That's the only exclusivity they have. Everything else shouldn't be exclusive. And what I mean by that, all those weird words, right? Like, what I'm saying is that movie theaters can make a ton more money if they stopped with the 8 p.m. show and then a 10 p.m. show, and that, 3 shows a day and that's it, right? They need to open up their mind a little bit more and say, hey, like, how can we use the resources that we have now in a way that we can increase our revenue? Well, number one, MoviePass is the perfect solution, because then you basically have and they can even do their own subscription model, right? But you could have somebody pay, let's say they throw out MoviePass and say, we'll do the same thing, but you got to pay $40 a month for it. I guarantee you a ton of people would do that, especially if it was at their local theater. Like, if I could become like a charter member of my local theater, because that's the one that I go to, and basically say, yeah, I'll pay you $40 a month, but I want unlimited movies to go to, right? Like, that is a solution to this problem, because that will get more people to go more often, but most importantly, it'll get the right type of people to go more often. It's those frequent moviegoers who are really going to run your business at the end of the day. And the positives to that are you get people in the seats, you're using your capital in a more efficient way. Why movie theaters are terrified of that notion is for one specific reason, is that the per revenue take per visit per customer will go down. That is, each time a customer goes to see a movie, the revenue would go down under a subscription model. But what they're not seeing is that it'll probably go up overall, just based on concession sales, and just like having people go kind of becomes a social thing when other people go. It just increases activity and business at their movie theater, and they don't really see that sort of asymmetrical way of getting revenue for some reason. They are still stuck on the idea that going to a movie is this exclusive event for a person, and it shouldn't be. If they want to make real money and do a lot better revenue wise, they will open up and look back into the past and look back when movie theaters weren't, it wasn't this big event. It was just something you did. It was a leisure activity. And, I hope that they do that. And the dynamic pricing is stupid. I think it's dumb. It doesn't make any sense. They're grasping at straws right now is really what they're doing. And I don't see it working at all, especially people paying more. The problem right now is price. It's price. That's the problem. If you make someone pay 20% more to see a blockbuster, like, basic laws of economy are going to be what? Less people are going to go to the movie theater. Like, it doesn't... I don't know. I feel like they're viewing the problem from exactly the wrong angle. But in any event, all right, I've blabbled on enough on this preview show. It's supposed to be a half hour and it's gone over an hour now. But I really wanted to talk about that article. I think it's really fascinating. Check it out. It's on Bloomberg. Regal Cinema's plan may let you pay less for flops, more for hits is the title. Check out the Reddit box office subreddit for more information and sort of comments on the article. And as always, thanks for listening. I will be back on Sunday with my weekend review show. Thanks. This has been the Wildline Podcast.